Good morning. So I have three short readings this morning. There's going to be a quote, and it's a quote from the author and civil rights activist James Baldwin. He wrote a book called Tell It on the Mountain, and then he also wrote a book that's a lot of essays. I've not read those, but from reading his quote, I know I need to. And then after that, I'm going to read a short poem and then an excerpt from the epilogue of a book. So here's the quote from James. The longer I live, the more deeply I learn that love, whether we call it friendship or family or romance, is the work of mirroring and magnifying each other's light. Gentle work, steadfast work, life-saving work in those moments when life and shame and sorrow occlude our own light from our view. But there is still a clear-eyed, loving person to beam it back. In our best moments, we are that person for one another. Is that not beautiful? Yeah. So now I got to read his books. The next one is a short poem. It's called The Peace of the Wild Things. You may know this poem, and it's by Wendell Berry. It speaks to me because when I read it, it immediately invoked memories of my childhood. I grew up in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey in a house that had some troubled times. And whenever there was trouble in the house, I would just burst out the door and run into the woods. And I knew exactly where there was this wonderful little, it's like a cove, but just a gathering of little pine trees. And I could just sort of skid slide like I was going into first base under the boughs of the pine trees and lay there and, on this bed of cool green moss and stare up through the trees and watch the birds. And so this is what that poem reminds me of. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty in the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of the wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. And I know that probably speaks to anyone who knows when you bond and are one with nature, the freedom that gives you. The next one is an excerpt from the epilogue of a beautiful book. It's called This Tender Land. Has anyone read? Yeah. It's by William Kent Krueger. And basically it's a coming of age story about three orphan boys who embark on a journey to find their kinfolk in St. Louis. And I think the story actually begins in Michigan or Minnesota, one or the other. He's a Minnesota author. And this is from his epilogue. There is a river that, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to make this bigger. There is a river that runs through time and the universe, vast and inexplicable, a flow of spirit that is at the heart of all existence, and every molecule of our being is a part of it. And what is God but the whole of that river? When I look back at the summer of 1932, I see a boy not quite 13 doing his best to pin down God, to corral that river and give it a form he can understand. Like so many before him, he shaped it and reshaped it and shaped it again, and yet it continued to defy all his logic. I would love to be able to call out to him and tell him in a kindly way that reason will do him no good, that it's pointless to rail about the difficulty of the twists in that river, and that he shouldn't worry about where the current will take him. But I confess that even after more than 80 years of living, I still struggle to understand what I know in my heart is a mystery beyond human comprehension. Perhaps the most important truth I've learned across the whole of my life is that it's only when I yield to the river and embrace in the journey that I find peace. Thank you.